Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Sitting in for Pinky Webb, I'm Mai Rodriguez. Today on the program, senators raised concerns over the locations of additional EDCA or Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement sites in the country. President Bongbong Marcos will speak to Chinese Ambassador Huang Xilian to seek clarification on comments regarding the safety of OFWs in Taiwan amid tensions with China. And what is former President Rodrigo Duterte's next step after the International Criminal Court prosecutor rejected the government's arguments in the plea against the war on drugs? International law expert and former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque joins us live. The Philippines eyes using sites under its Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the U.S. to stage the evacuation of Filipinos in Taiwan in case China attacks the self-ruled island. This was revealed during a Senate hearing Wednesday in which lawmakers grilled administration officials over the expansion of the Defense Pact. Tensions over EDCA recently rose after China told the Philippines to oppose Taiwan's independence rather than stoking the fire by offering the U.S. access to military bases. Our correspondent Zian Arcangel has more.
The Department of National Defense is looking into the possibility of using EDCA sites to evacuate Filipinos in Taiwan in case of an attack by China. 3 of the 4 new EDCA sites are located in northern Philippines: Camp Melchor de la Cruz in Isabela and Camilo Osias Naval Base and Lalo Airport, both in Cagayan. At the hearing of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, DND officer in charge Carlito Galvez said the evacuation would be part of humanitarian assistance under EDCA.
If there is an attack on Taiwan by the Chinese forces, our main goal is really to first look for the welfare of our OFWs in Taiwan, and we have also talked to our counterpart that that's our primordial concern. We considered also the tensions that we are having right now in North Korea.
Saan? It's not within the ambit or purpose of the original EDCA. Tapos ang sabi niyo, yung addendum will just include 4 additional sites. Walang sinabi doon tungkol evacuation of nationals in time of conflict.
We have stated it clearly during our statement. If there is an unfortunate event on the Taiwan crisis, our primary consideration is the evacuations of 150,000 Filipinos and to absorb further other evacuations of other nationals.
Galvez said the 3 EDCA sites, along with the 4th location in Balabac, Palawan, will bolster the country's ability to respond to disasters and security threats. But senators ask, does the Philippines really stand to benefit from the new EDCA sites?
The instruction of the President is for us to prepare for external defense. And with that, we are trying to really allocate some resources and our modernization program on the northern side. If you look at the configuration of the armed forces strategy, our vulnerabilities is in the north.
In the north? I come from the north, sir. I don't feel very vulnerable.
If humanitarian and disaster response will be one of the core goals of this agreement, then common sense will dictate that the President should be located in disaster-prone areas for purposes of quick response. For example, Region 5.
Despite the announcement of the new EDCA sites, Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo admits no document has been signed formalizing their designation. He says the Philippines and the U.S. are discussing the inclusion of the new sites in the EDCA Annex. Officials had a hard time answering questions on U.S. access to EDCA sites in case China attacks Taiwan.
Paano yung pag-iimbak ng mga weaponry ng mga sandatahan laban sa Taiwan? Hahayaan ba natin o hindi?
We will be guided by the provisions of the EDCA and our own national interest. And I think at this stage, our main foreign policy is really to be friends to all.
If Taiwan is attacked, Can the US use the EDCA sites to counterattack China? Yes or no lang po?
There's a process.
Hindi, dapat yes or no kasi nagmamadali eh. Dahil nagbobombahan na eh.
Senator Marcos wants issues on EDCA ironed out when it is reviewed next year. She says national interest should always prevail in negotiating any bilateral agreement. Cian Arcangel, CNN, Philippines.
Let's go straight to the source of the story. International law expert and former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque. Good morning, Attorney Roque. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. I'm joining you from China right now, no? And I have to say that although I'm no longer in Beijing, I had the opportunity to talk to Filipino journalists based in Beijing. They are in fact country bureau chiefs, no, of foreign media outfits, including formerly of CNN, NBC, ABC, as well as Singapore Straits Times. And all of them are unanimous in saying that they see trouble ahead. They see that there might be an open exchange of fire between the United States and China over the Taiwan issue. And that is why bases in the Philippines is very urgent. The Filipino journalists here, very senior journalists here based in China, see that there might be a shooting war. And because we have given Americans access to our bases, particularly in the north, we will be drawn into this conflict. Perhaps Secretary Douglas is correct that the EDCA sites could be used when evacuating Filipinos, but the issue is not really what we can do with our own bases. Of course, when there's a shooting war, our primary consideration will be the 200,000 Filipinos, which is what Ambassador Wang warned about, no? That in case of a shooting war,
All right, we're losing connection with Attorney Harry Roque. He just said he was joining us from China this morning. He did say he did write an article about his concerns about these new additional EDCA sites, and I'd like to talk to him about that further when we get him back. He did say that he has consistently assailed the constitutionality of EDCA, and I'd like to explore that in a bit. But first, Attorney Roque, you were saying? We lost you for a bit there, Attorney.
yes, as I was saying, the problem with allowing Americans access to our bases is the Philippine president simply cannot order the American soldiers to do what he wants. They will follow the command of the commander-in-chief, which is the American president. So regardless of what we say the Americans can or cannot do, the moment we give them access to our bases, it's their call. And that's the reality.
So you did say in an article that you wrote that, in effect, the 9 agreed locations become a valid military target for China.
Yes, that is the definition of a valid military objective under the Geneva Conventions, the destruction of which will contribute to the military objective, which is, of course, a subjugation of the enemy. No? And of course, when the Americans use our bases as a launching pad to attack China, then our bases become valid military objectives. No? The Chinese can fire upon our bases because there's also a principle in international law that a country that allows its territory to be used in a manner injurious to another must be responsible under international law.
Attorney Roque, let's also talk about the concerns raised by Senator Amy Marcos. She's the chair of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and she questioned in yesterday's hearing the location of 3 EDCA sites, the ones in northern Luzon. And despite the claims of government officials standing by their position about the strategic value of these EDCA sites, overall, do you see these sites as strategic for us?
There's no strategic importance for the Philippines, but a strategic importance for the United States. I think even for China, belatedly, they have realized how important the Philippines is because of our geographical location. With the 3 bases up north, in case of a shooting war in the Taiwan Straits, the Philippines becomes an unsinkable warship or an aircraft carrier. No? And I think belatedly, in my talks with the Chinese leaders here, they have realized that perhaps they should have paid more attention to the Philippines in terms of investments, in terms of capital inflow into the country, because now they realize that the value of the Philippines is our location. We are basically the gateway to China and the rest of mainland Asia.
Right. Well, another question raised by lawmakers, I think this is Senator Gatchalian, is if the sites are for humanitarian assistance, why not choose disaster-prone locations? Your thoughts on this?
Well, precisely. I think policymakers might just be forthright, especially since the prognosis here in China is there will be a shooting war. Let us not wait already. Given the mood here in China, I would really recommend, number one, that we should stop deploying further OFWs to Taiwan, because the feeling here in China is that the shooting war will be inevitable. There is consensus here that historically China will not start it, but there's consensus here that the United States may just provoke it.
Well, Attorney Roque, Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo said that the Philippines will not allow the U.S. to stockpile weapons for its Taiwan response in these EDCA sites. Is this enough assurance for you?
No, because there is nothing in the language of EDCA itself, which we assailed in the Supreme Court, that will prevent the United States from stockpiling whatever it wants from our bases. Under the signed EDCA, we even have the power to conduct visitorial visits on these sites. We are not allowed access to these sites, so we will not know what they have prepositioned. That's the document that we signed in 2014, which we assailed. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court, maybe because at that time it had not yet been implemented, said that the treaty basis for EDCA was the Mutual Defense Treaty, not knowing that the conflict may actually arise because of the Taiwan Strait, and the Taiwan issue. But one of the provisions which we specifically assailed was, even if it is our military bases, we cannot conduct any inspection on what Americans have prepositioned in this basis.
But do you believe the U.S. when it says it will not stockpile weapons once these sites become operational? And it did say before that these sites will only be used for humanitarian assistance.
Certainly not. There is nothing in the language of the written EDCA that would prevent them. In fact, the language of preposition equipment of the U.S. Defense Department obviously refers to weapons. So we have allowed them to preposition soldiers that will use the weapons in these Philippine bases.
Attorney Roque, do you think there is a need for new legislation or amendment to EDCA?
Well, the EDCA will expire next year. And that is why I joined the call of Senator Amy Marcos that we have to very carefully re-examine now the provisions of EDCA in lieu of the tension in the Taiwan Strait. When we signed the agreement in 2014, there was not much tension at all in the Taiwan Strait, but there is now, and that is a reality. And that is why I am calling on our president, my president whom I campaigned for, to carefully evaluate the situation right now, because I am telling you, after having conferred with very senior leaders, after having conferred with very seasoned Filipino journalists who have been based in China since 1972 when martial law was declared, when they were stuck here, including even our Philippine ambassador here, there is apparently inevitable conflict in the Taiwan Strait, a conflict that we should never be involved with because it has nothing to do with putting more food in the dinner table of all Filipino families.
Okay, we have much more to talk about, but we have to take a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Mai Rodriguez. Our source today, international law expert and former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque, joining us from China. Attorney Roque, let's talk about the protests by Cagayan residents against these EDCA sites. Thousands of residents of Cagayan held a rally this week to protest these new sites in their province, and Governor Manuel Mamba also repeatedly expressed his opposition to the EDCA sites. Your thoughts on this, and what other avenues can they pursue?
I completely understand the predicament of the Cagayanos, because a shooting war would inevitably mean there would be casualties, where the two bases in Cagayan will be attacked by China. Now, in case of a shooting war, I would like this to be very clear. China would have a legitimate interest to target the bases being used by the Americans because they have become valid military objective under international humanitarian law. And what we seek to avoid, of course, are collateral damage. No? But in a war, even if we don't want to have collateral damage, they do happen. And the collateral damage would be in terms of civilian lives of the Cagayanos and other Filipinos surrounding the bases being utilized by the United States as their military bases for the time being. So I commiserate with them, I sympathize with them, and I join them in spirit.
Right. I also want to talk about the column that you wrote about this. You raised the constitutionality of EDCA, and you said you maintain that it should be covered by a treaty duly recognized by the other contracting party, in this case, the U.S., and ratified in a referendum by the Filipino people if deemed necessary by the Senate. So are you planning to challenge the validity of the EDCA again before the Supreme Court?
I will be forthright. I campaigned for the president, and if only because of that, I will not challenge his policies because he is the chief architect of foreign policy. I will defer to him. However, I will speak out in the hope that he will listen to me. He knows me. He knows that I only have the national interest at heart. And at some point, he has to listen to alternative views other than those expressed by our ambassador to the United States and his other relatives. No? I hope that he will take time out also to listen to the concerns of his own sister, because I am repeating the consensus here in China, as I am already on my seventh day of visit, is that conflict is inevitable.
Well, let's talk about the points that you raised, that we could be a valid military target by China, because one of the concerns also is that if the U.S. defends Taiwan in case of an armed conflict, will the Philippines be obliged now to join the war because of our mutual defense treaty?
Legally not, because the Mutual Defense Treaty calls upon collective security in case any of either of us are subject to an armed attack. But as you can see, if Taiwan is attacked by China, there's no attack on the United States. There's no reason why we should be drawn into the war. But because we have allowed American troops and equipment to be in the Philippines, that makes us a valid military target as far as China is concerned. And that's the concern that I'm expressing. That's a concern that every Filipino should share. Because in the national anthem, we have sung as children that we will die for the country, for the country Philippines, but we will not die for Taiwan.
All right, speaking of Taiwan, President Marcos says he wants to speak with Chinese Ambassador Huang Xilian on his remarks regarding Taiwan and overseas Filipino workers there. Let's listen in again to what the ambassador said last week.
The Philippines is advised to unequivocally oppose Taiwan independence rather than stoking the fire by offering the U.S. access to the military bases near the Taiwan Strait, if you care about the 150,000 overseas foreign workers.
Attorney Roque, how do you make sense of the ambassador's message? Is it a threat, a warning, a friendly reminder perhaps?
It's a fact. In case of a shooting war, amongst the casualties in Taiwan will be Filipino workers. That's inevitable in an armed conflict. And that's why I'm saying as early as now, if we cannot start repatriating our kababayans from Taiwan, we should at least stop further deployment to Taiwan, no? Because Filipinos are oblivious to the tension, no? But I have been to the United States before coming to China, and whether be it in the United States or in China, the consensus is the same: there will be a shooting war.
So should OFWs be worried about the situation?
I think they should. I think they should start already having contingencies. I think the Philippine government should already prohibit further entrance into Taiwan and should encourage Filipinos to start coming back to the Philippines.
Well, Senator Risa Hontiveros went as far as wanting Malacanang to tell Beijing to recall Ambassador Huang, and some lawmakers even called him a bully. Your thoughts, Attorney Roque?
I think he was stating a fact that in case of a shooting war, amongst the casualties, the Collateral damage would be the Filipinos in Taiwan itself, because that's a necessary consequence, no, of an armed conflict. And that's what the Chinese ambassador was referring to. Take note that China itself has no power to determine if OFWs will enter Taiwan, because it is Taiwan that issues the entry permits to our workers. No, so it does not make sense for the Chinese ambassador to make any threat that they will not deploy Filipino workers in Taiwan. That is not what he meant. He meant that in case of shooting war, Filipinos could be killed because, of course, in case of a conflict between America and China on Taiwan, the main battleground would be Taiwan itself. The secondary battleground would be the Philippine bases in the Philippines being utilized by America.
This conflict, Attorney Roque, what is the timetable that you're looking at? May posible bang kung kailan mangyari?
You know, I think you should talk to the veteran Filipino journalists who are head of foreign media bureaus here, no? There's Ben Lim, who's writing for the Singapore Straits Times, no? There's another one, Eric, no, who is bureau chief of NBC here, no? And of course, our Philippine ambassador, who used to be, if I'm not mistaken, either one of the international agencies, no, country head of bureau here in China, no? But it seems that no one is even listening to the Philippine ambassador to China. No one is seeking his advice, no? So I'm enjoining at least media establishments, because these are Filipinos who have become country bureau chiefs of CNN even, no? To please call them and ask for their opinion so that the Filipino people will know how dangerous the situation has become.
All right. We have to take a short break now. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Mai Rodriguez. Our source today, international law expert and former presidential spokesperson, Harry Roque. Attorney Roque, I'd like to shift gears now and talk about the ICC's probe on the war on drugs and the possible next moves of former President Rodrigo Duterte. First, the response of ICC prosecutor Karim Khan to the Philippines' appeal. He maintained that former President Duterte encouraged the bloody drug war. Your comment?
Well, I think it's very clear that any country has, in fact, a sovereign obligation to deal with the threat arising from prohibited drugs, no? So insofar as the Philippine government or the Philippine president has discharged this obligation, of course, we will admit to that, because no government will tolerate illegal trafficking in drugs.
Attorney Roque, are you still legal counsel of President Duterte? And did you receive any communication from the ICC?
I am, but unfortunately, I had no hand in the decision to file an appeal. What I'm preparing for is the stage where there will be confirmation of charges against specific individuals. No, at this point, no single individual has been named as an accused that is subject to an investigation. So no member of the list council of the ICC has personality to represent anyone as of yet. No. And since I had nothing to do with the appeal, please direct all your queries on the appeal to the Solicitor General himself.
Attorney, I'd like to know if you have spoken to former President Duterte about this, and ano po ang bilin niya sa inyo?
It's very clear. He will never face any foreign tribunal. He will never face any foreign judge. He appeals to all those who may have felt that they have been aggrieved by him to file their suits, but here in the Philippines, because we are sovereign and independent state, and our courts are not unwilling and unable to exercise jurisdiction in any case that they may file against him.
What are the possible next moves, Attorney Roque, if he is not willing, if he is unwilling to cooperate with the ICC?
The final is the confirmation of charges, and after which, good luck to the ICC if they want to arrest the president, because the Philippine government has said that they will not cooperate.
All right, thank you for joining us in The Source this morning, international law expert and former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque. And thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Maya Rodriguez. You're watching CNN Philippines.